"You're an extra mouth," my daughter snapped coldly, watching silently as her husband threw me onto the street. They had no idea I still held one powerful card. I quietly bought their entire apartment building and tripled their rent. Sometimes those who toss you aside forget who holds the keys until it's too late and they're locked out for good. Hi everyone, I'm Jessica, the storyteller on the Family Tales channel. Here, I'll share stories about love, conflicts, betrayal, and infidelity within American families. These stories offer a deep look into relationships and the challenges families face. Stay tuned and explore with me. If you love emotional stories and want to uncover the hidden secrets in families, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our videos. I never imagined that my own daughter would abandon me. I never thought she would let the man she married to deprive me of my dignity when I was at my lowest. They were unaware, however, that I had one final card to play in life, and everything changed as I played it. Prepare yourself, because what you're going to hear is a reckoning, not simply a story. For more stories like this, remember to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below indicating where you are viewing. Margaret is my name. I'm 58 years old, and until recently, I thought that unconditional love existed, particularly in familial relationships. My life was centered on my spouse and our kid, Amanda. They benefited from every meal I prepared, every holiday I organized, and every penny I saved. Last year, when my spouse died of cancer, I felt as though the floor had disappeared. However, I reminded myself that I still had Amanda. My daughter was still with me. My husband and I built a home in Cedar Park, just north of Austin, from the ground up, and I sold it. Too many memories. Far too many mornings were spent anticipating his voice calling from the kitchen. At the very least, Amanda offered me a place to stay for a bit with her husband, Chad. When I moved in, Chad hardly raised his head from his phone. I made an effort to be unnoticed. I stayed in my little back room. I tried to be helpful and stay out of the way while cooking, cleaning, and offering to run errands. Chad, however, had a way of making me feel unwelcome. He constantly had this annoyance in his eyes, like if I were a splinter beneath his skin. The little things were where it all began. If I asked him a question, he would roll his eyes. When I was mid-show, he would switch the TV. I once overheard him muttering, "Freeloader," as he walked past me in the hallway. In my heart, I knew I hadn't misheard, but I attempted to convince myself otherwise. "Amanda?" She remained silent. I would turn to her for support, advice, or anything else. She always downplayed it, though. She would claim, "He's stressed. Work has been difficult." I kept quiet, swallowing the embarrassment. Mothers do that, don't they? But it broke me that night. That one night. The supper table was where we were. His favorite was chicken pot pie, which I had prepared. While Chad was drinking his beer as usual, Amanda was browsing through her phone. There was a heavy hush. "You know, maybe it's time we stop pretending this is temporary," Chad replied, suddenly looking up. "We are not a nonprofit." Amanda stopped. I gazed at him. "What are you saying?" He grinned. "How long is this expected to last, really? You're not at work. You're not making a contribution. We have bills. We didn't sign up to feed more mouths." I gasped. I had a racing heart. Desperate, I resorted to Amanda. "Amanda?" She refused to look at me. "Maybe it's better if you find something more stable," she muttered. "For the benefit of everybody. For the benefit of everybody." I refrained from screaming. I refrained from arguing. I got up, went to my room, and gathered my belongings. 2 bags. That was my only remaining life. I packed without even crying. Later, when I realized I had nowhere to go and was standing outside their building with the wind tearing through my coat, I started crying. I wasn't walked out by Amanda. Chad didn't even make an effort to act. I spent an hour sitting on the curb. The battery on my phone died. So was my heart. This is what it feels like to be wiped, I recall thinking. I stayed in a motel that night, the kind where the vending machine takes your change and the wallpaper peels. I wondered how everything could get so cold as I lay awake and stared at the ceiling, pondering what I had done to merit such desertion. I texted Amanda the following morning. I get it. I cherish you. Always. No response. I sent another the following week, then another. Birthdays, minor revisions, quiet. It was 3 months later. Every day seemed to drag on forever. I attempted to apply for jobs, anything. However, no one was interested in hiring a sad widow with no recent work experience who was in her late 50s. I thought about babysitting and house cleaning. However, my body no longer moved as it once did. The isolation, it was oppressive. Even worse is the embarrassment. That chick had gotten everything from me. How could she so effortlessly turn around? I was looking through a box of old family mementos one evening and was attempting to connect with something. Anything. I located it. The ancient diary of my mother. It had been years since I'd read it. Perhaps never. But I was drawn to it by something. I took a seat on the motel bed's edge, turned the pages. That's when I discovered it. A moniker, a fact, a secret that made all the difference. I can still clearly recall the moment. I had trembling hands. My heart pounded, because all of a sudden, I wasn't the only mother expelled. I was a completely different person. Additionally, it was the first time in months. I grinned. I lost everything to them. However, they were unaware of the impending events. The days after that night blended together like gray watercolors dripping onto a damp canvas. The stench of distant smokes and stale air filled the motel room. The lullaby of defeat was the buzzing hum of the vending machine outside my door. I said nothing. Not every night did I cry, but there was silence when I did. Your entire body trembles as you cry, but you keep it to yourself because no one is coming to console you. On the 4th day, I sent Amanda another SMS, a straightforward message. I'm all right, I just wanted to check in with you. No response. 2 weeks later, I made another attempt. Just an emoji of a heart. Nothing. I reasoned that she was occupied, that she would change her mind, that anything must be twisted by Chad. But as the weeks passed, I began to lose that hope. I was losing money. I attempted to find part-time employment, front offices, grocery stores, and even a diner by the highway. However, I wasn't a good fit, or I was overqualified. This simply means too old and too tired in polite code. I sorted through the one box I had packed that wasn't clothing one evening while sitting on the floor of that room. The residence had a dusty memory box, a few letters, some old pictures, and something hidden away at the bottom. A little book, bound in leather. The diary of my mother. I was taken aback. Packing it is not something I recall. I nearly replaced it. However, I paused for a moment because of how the leather felt in my hands. I turned on the first page and ignited the antique lamp on the side table. The notes Mother used to smuggle into my lunchbox as a child were still written in the same hand, tidy, looped, and constantly inked. It was routine stuff at first. Church, weather, and grievances on the cost of groceries. However, I then reached the June entry. He returned today, expressed his yearning for a different situation. He wanted me to be his wife, he said. He has a family, though, a company, a name to keep safe. Margaret won't be aware of it. She can't possibly know. I simply hope that one day she will realize how much I cherished her, despite the fact that she was born of desire and error. I read it twice, but then again, she can't possibly know. My chest tightened every breath. I turned over even more, one entry after another, some hints, recollections, gatherings in hotels. She really needed small cash transfers, but she tried to refuse them. She just gave him his initials and never his entire name, HJS. However, There's more. February. He claimed to have made plans, that he would make sure Margaret had something if he ever died, a portion of his construction. Of course, it won't be official. It's too risky. However, he assured me, a trust, a letter. He claimed that Mr. Goldstein, his attorney, would be aware. That name, I felt as though I had been punched in the gut. Goldstein, I had previously watched it. Using the motel's communal computer, I conducted multiple internet searches over the course of 2 days. However, I located him. Goldstein, Leonard, retired estate attorney, still listed under a Dallas-based private firm. I did not make a call. I was unable to. My hands were too shaken. I sent a letter instead. A genuine, handwritten letter outlining my identity and that of my mother, pleading for a chat. I got a call 2 weeks later. I recall the crack in his voice when I brought up my mother's name. He was acquainted with her, not only in a professional capacity. For myself, he remarked, "I always wondered if you'd reach out someday. Something needs to be seen by you." The following morning, I rode a Greyhound to Dallas. In case he turned out to be a scammer, I had my suitcase mostly packed. However, I knew it was true when I entered that silent office that was crammed with antiquated literature and even more antiquated silence. He gave me an envelope that was sealed, yellowed, delicate. It came from Harold James Sterling, who founded one of Central Texas's largest oil companies, Sterling Energy, a man I had spent my entire life seeing in newspaper clippings, an individual having a family, a standing, a legacy. The letter was addressed to Margaret Louise, my daughter. I was unable to read it all at once. Before the second paragraph, I started crying. He was completely honest. The scandal, the remorse, the love that is silent, the promise followed. In the event that I pass away, I have made arrangements for Mr. Goldstein to deliver to you a portion of my personal assets that cannot be located through my estate. My blood is you. I claim you now in death, even though I was too cowardly to do so in life. A folder was slid across the table by Mr. Goldstein. And within, bank accounts, a small portfolio of investments, documents of ownership, titles, the entire amount, a little more than $5 million. I gazed at the documents. Next, at him. "Is this thing real?" I muttered. He gave a nod. "You own it." It was always. My heart pounded. I felt chosen for the first time in my life, not because of the money, observed. Neither did I laugh, cry, or shout. Like a long-awaited rain, I sat there, silent as a whisper, allowing the truth to wash over me. I didn't sleep in my motel room that night. As I had done for months, I gazed at the ceiling, but this time a smile was beginning to appear on my face. They believed they had cast me aside. They believed I was finished. However, they were clueless. I wasn't damaged. I had only barely begun. I took some time to return to Austin. Something had changed within me. Indefinitely, I was more than the forgotten mother Margaret. I had changed. Someone who had been deceived all her life and at last realized the truth. I was not wallowing in shame for the first time in months, perhaps years. Clarity was in my air. For a few more days, I remained in Dallas, simply strolling through neighborhoods, quietly drinking coffee and observing people going about their daily lives. Individuals who hadn't been thrown out like me. I wasn't envious of them for the first time. I researched them. I pondered which of them had grief hidden behind their smiles, someone who had been duped. They had fought their way out of the shadows. I didn't just inherit it from Leonard Goldstein. He waited for me. It's processing time. It was time to comprehend what I was holding. It was more than just money. Power was the issue. Furthermore, I was clueless on what to do with it. But after enough humiliation, grief has a way of turning into fuel. I didn't return to the motel when I got back to Austin. I made a reservation for a short-term rental located off South Congress in the downtown area. Quiet, modern, and clean. Amanda and Chad would never think I could afford such a house. I started dressing differently, more refined, more intentional. Not dazzling, simply invisible in a novel sense. You know, invisible enough to get through doors. I began watching investing-related YouTube videos, property, agreements. I became proficient in business jargon. Protecting myself was more important to me than establishing an empire. I would never again be helpless. I discovered it at that point. On a website for real estate auctions, the listing was hidden, a complex of apartments in East Austin. Although a little dilapidated, it is structurally sound. Where? The actual complex in which Chad and Amanda resided. My heart was racing as I sat there and stared at the TV. The owner was in arrears on property taxes, and it was classed as distressed. In 2 weeks, there will be an auction. I didn't think twice. I established an LLC, an anonymous shell corporation, with Mr. Goldstein's assistance. I put in the bid, transferred the money, and filed the papers. I had no plans for retaliation. Not precisely. However, I was going to seize the one area they believed to be within their authority. The auction came and went. I prevailed, silently, lawfully, completely unnoticed. Suddenly, I was the owner of the building in which they resided, when I was expelled with 2 luggage and a flimsy justification. When I was at my lowest, they humiliated me. I recall sitting at my desk staring at the deed and muttering to a mouth he couldn't feed, "Let's see how Chad likes paying rent." All of the tenants received the notification letters a month later. The rents would be re-evaluated, checked the conditions of the lease. What about Amanda and Chad? It was tripled, not twice, triple, plus past due fees and market value. He must have blown up. I knew without having to see it. From a great distance, I could sense the anger. However, money was not the issue. It has to do with pride. A man like Chad wanted to feel in charge. Additionally, I had just caught him off guard, in silence. 2 days following the notification, Amanda attempted to contact me by phone. She had not contacted me since the evening I departed. I let the voicemail go. "Mom, I'm not sure whether you heard, but there's a strange thing happening. Our rent has increased dramatically, like a lot. Chad is going crazy. I'm not sure. Can we have a conversation?" I didn't answer. This has nothing to do with revenge. It had to do with gravity. They had to experience the consequences of their decisions. On one occasion, late at night, I drove past the building. They had their lights on. Shadows were moving beneath the drapes as I could see. Amanda is pacing, Chad shouting. There was no mistaking his silhouette. I spent a minute observing them, then took off in a car. I felt empty inside. I felt vindicated in part, and a terrible part of me still hurts, because I would have done anything to be invited back in, even now, knowing what I knew and holding what I held. Not to the unit, but to the heart of my daughter. However, I was aware that was not feasible. Not yet, anyhow, so I said nothing. I waited after that. It is sometimes the silence that speaks loudest when it comes to justice. I wasn't done yet either. 3 weeks after the rent rise, I met Amanda at the grocery store and realized how much I had changed. She failed to notice me. I was concealed behind a rack of cheap cereal 2 aisles away. She appeared worn out. Not simply worn out, worn down. The way she used to wrap her hair back when she was crying was sloppy. Half of her cart was empty, primarily inexpensive staples, a couple off-brand cans, eggs and rice. I ought to have left. I didn't. With my heart racing as though I were doing something criminal, I followed her through the store from a distance. Before glancing down at her phone, she stopped in front of a little box of mac cheese, perhaps a text from Chad. She lowered her shoulders. She replaced the box. I was broken by that moment. I recalled the young girl who used to come to me in tears when she scraped her knee, not because I felt sorry for her. The one who requested me to look under her bed every night for monsters. She was now sharing a home with one. That day, I drove home and spent hours sitting quietly on the couch. I pondered how life had turned us into strangers as I gazed out the window. But this wasn't punishment, I told myself. This was the result, and it was far past time for consequences. Now I had plans, not simply the structure, but a chess game played slowly and quietly. Every action is calculated. Every action is deliberate. I began repairs once the LLC was fully established and the property had been officially transferred. First, small ones. Flickering lights, broken locks, and leaks. Chad didn't notice. The rent increase distracted him too much. Yelling via email at the property manager, requesting clarification. However, I was familiar with him, knew the workings of his ego. He would not be moved. That would be his defeat. What about Amanda? She would do as she always did and follow his lead. So I continued. I updated the signs on the property, had a security camera placed close to the entrance. The mailboxes of the tenants were updated, all under my business's name, ML Holdings, abbreviation for Margaret Louise. Nobody was aware of its perpetrator. The notice then arrived. Inspections every year. Required. Chad responded angrily via the tenant site, expressing self-righteous outrage and making baseless threats. As I read it, I grinned. I didn't have to do anything to help him unravel. In the meantime, I was changing into a person I hardly recognized. I changed the way I wore my hair, sharper clothing. I had a purpose as I walked. I began using a pseudonym to attend small business meetups, gaining knowledge on real estate, establishing relationships. Nobody inquired about my background. All they saw was a calm, peaceful woman with money in her pocket and keen eyes. The truth you choose not to speak is the best camouflage. I was leaving a tenant meeting one morning when I walked past Amanda and Chad in the parking lot. I held my documents, wore my sunglasses, and wore my hair in a beautiful bun. Amanda hardly gave me a look. I was completely unrecognizable to Chad. Later that evening, while I sipped tea in my living room, I reflected on how odd it was to pass your own child and remain invisible. You're stronger than they realize, not because you're weak. Since they only knew the version of me they used to control, they were unable to see me now. The woman has vanished. Amanda kept calling, voicemails, tentative and soft. Hello, Mom. I was just wondering if you might have time to speak. I am aware that things have been difficult. I didn't give them back. I needed her to feel the emptiness she created, not because I was being unkind. And I opened my mother's diary whenever I started to have doubts. Those were the words I read again and again. Margaret won't be aware of it. She can't possibly know. But now I knew. A sort of armor that no one could rip through came with that awareness. The woman pleading to remain beneath their roof was no longer me. It belonged to me, the woman. Retaliation, in my opinion, is not about getting even. It has to do with equilibrium. Justice without flames. Not a battle, but a correction. However, I must admit that I felt a tiny glimmer of joy when I saw Chad's email answer when he was informed of his rent increase. Rent increase subject? This is completely inappropriate. This has to be an error. Our rent has tripled. Extortion is what that is. I insist on talking to the owner of this dump. In our 3 years here, we have never been late. It's robbery. He put his signature on it. Harmon, Chad D. As if his name had any significance. After reading the email 3 times, I sent it along with a brief note to my property manager. Regarding market rate adjustments, please reply using Standard Clause C. No particular exceptions. Chad wasn't only upset, he was taken aback. He was too conceited to consider that someone could outmaneuver him. He was so accustomed to being in charge that he was furious at the thought of having to answer to an anonymous landlord. That following evening, Amanda attempted to phone me once more. It was a different voicemail. Not a pretense. I really need to talk to you, Mom, but I know you're not answering. Right now, things are difficult. Chad is angry. He is expressing his frustration on all fronts. We're attempting to solve the problem. You are missed. Yes, I do. At the end, her voice cracked. My fingers briefly lingered over the screen. I could give her another call, assure her it will be well. I'd make everything right. However, I didn't, as that wasn't acceptable. Additionally, I couldn't keep cleaning up the mess she caused. Like I was like a bill they couldn't afford. Amanda had let him to throw me out, and she recalled how to call my number now that she was under pressure. No, give her a bit more time to endure the solitude. I gave my approval for more improvements to the property the next week. Fresh paint on the outside, illumination in the hallway, enhancements to the landscaping. Chad's rent wasn't merely a penalty. It was used to pay for the other tenants' upgrades. The irony was that the others profited. He simply was unable to see it. He started writing irate messages beneath the office door. There is terrible water pressure. There is an accumulation of trash. It's a joke if this is what we're paying for. Not a single note was answered. Amanda ceased leaving messages. Instead, she began texting, brief ones. Can we talk, please? I truly need you. Then there was stillness once more. I watched the bank statements arrive in the interim. ML Holdings remained steady, even profitable. The other renters were punctual, courteous, and quiet. Chad was the only one making sound. Amanda was caught up in his fury as well. However, when I got the building manager's quarterly report, everything changed. Pictures of Chad and Amanda's apartment were included. There was mildew in the bathroom. The tiles in the kitchen cracked. Stacks of mail on the ground. They were taking shortcuts. Living frugally, I ought to have been sympathetic. Rather, I experienced clarity. Rent wasn't the only issue here. It had to do with power. And Chad was rapidly losing it. It was rumored in the building that he had begun working overtime. One afternoon, another renter noticed Amanda sobbing on the back steps. They were falling apart from within. Furthermore, I didn't need to speak. That was what I kept returning to. I was the one pleading to be heard for a very long time. Amanda was urged to see what Chad was, to stand next to him and observe what she was becoming. Their own stillness was now strangling them, and from above, I was observing, literally. I had a view of their patio from my new apartment, a different structure, higher floor, a safer area. They could never afford that view. I wasn't always watching them, enough to remind me I wasn't insane, that the betrayal had not occurred to me, that there should be repercussions for what they did to me. Even so, there were still nights when I found myself sitting by the window. I'm holding my phone, focusing on Amanda's most recent message. I truly need you, the woman within me, the mom, hurt. But the lady I'd grown into, she was aware that this was just the start. I've always believed that heartbreak happens in noisy situations, doors slamming, yelled words, scenes in public. The actual heartbreak, though, it's silent. It appears like a voicemail that you fail to return, an unread message. You and the person who used to call you mama are silent. Amanda's calls ceased. The texts became slower. However, the harm on her end simply appeared to get worse. I learned from the building personnel that the tension in their flat had escalated into outright animosity. Everyone was being sniped at by Chad, rejecting requests for maintenance and insisting on pointless inspections, seeking a culprit. I was informed that Amanda appeared to have been sleep-deprived for days. I didn't celebrate. I didn't rejoice. Watching them suffer wasn't the point. It had to do with something much more agonizing. Observing my daughter voluntarily remaining in a cage and claiming it is love. Following a noise complaint one afternoon, my property management forwarded a report. Downstairs, the neighbor had heard a furious dispute, shouting, "Something about losing control, and you are solely to blame for this." Chad left without warning and returned only the following morning. Amanda spent the entire night confined in the apartment. The lights are off, the curtains were drawn. I waited, not for Chad, for her. 2 more days passed, 2 agonizing, weary days. Then one evening, the intercom in my building buzzed as the sun was disappearing behind the trees. "Hello, I'm Amanda Harmon. I wanted to know if my mother, Margaret, actually resides here." My heart stopped beating. I took a while to respond. All I did was watch the TV, frozen. I then pushed the door release carefully. After 10 minutes, there was a gentle knock on the door of my apartment. She appeared to be a shadow of the daughter I had nurtured when I opened it. Pale, smudged makeup. Her shirt is wrinkled. She appeared to be 20 years her senior. We looked at one another for a while. Neither of us said anything. At long last, she exhaled. "Hello, Mother." I moved out of the way. She entered carefully, as if she wasn't sure if she was permitted. While I made 2 mugs, the only sound in the room was the clinking of teacups. I didn't inquire as to her purpose. I didn't inquire about her health. I simply sat down opposite her, gave her the tea, and waited. Her voice was hardly audible above a whisper as she added, "I don't know where to start." I remained silent. She cast her gaze downward. "Chad is not an easy person. He is constantly furious. The rent is to blame. It's my fault. For heaven's sake, don't blame the dog next door." But I said nothing. I believed I was acting appropriately. When we asked you to leave back then, I asked as though I had a choice. All I wanted to do was maintain harmony. I didn't want any more disputes. She stopped, then said, "Chad, unless we forced you to," he continued, "you would never leave. And God, I'm so mad at myself for concurring. I drank some tea. I'm missing you," she muttered. "However, I have no idea how to change it." I looked at her face. Each twitch, each line. She wanted forgiveness but was too scared to ask for it. I therefore offered her everything I could. Quiet. Because sometimes it's safer to be quiet than to speak the truth. For about an hour, we sat in that position. She made no requests for money. She didn't seek assistance. All she wanted was to be close to me. I also gave her permission. She sought for my hand when she eventually got up to go. "I apologize," she said, "for everything. I didn't respond." I simply held her hand for a little while longer than she had anticipated. She was the first to pull away. She then left through the door, her eyes brimming with sorrow. I refrained from crying. However, I slumped into my chair as soon as the door clicked shut, clutching her teacup in my hands like a lifeline. She had arrived. She had given me a direct glance. I knew now, at last, the fissures were beginning to appear. The thing about power, true power, is that you can use it without ever raising your voice. You don't shout threats or bang doors. Simply pull a thread here, shut a door there, and watch as those who misjudged you begin to tremble. What about Chad? He was writhing. The atmosphere in that flat darkened after Amanda's arrival. I could tell without a camera. If you listen carefully enough, you can hear a house falling apart. According to the maintenance crew, Chad had lost his mind and was clamoring twice a week to the management office to find out who owned the building. He was looking for names. He desired a face. He was looking for someone to hold accountable. The absence of one on his part, he spiraled as a result. He dug. I was certain he would. Chad wasn't one to take failure in stride. When Amanda spent too long in the store, I had witnessed how he would scan her phone. He made remarks about how long it took her to perform errands and examined her receipts. Possessive didn't even come close to describing it. Thus, when he began searching for the name of ML, and I was prepared, Holdings, his first attempt was to search for the LLC standard. However, everything was filed through a privacy trust by my lawyer. No names, no leads. After that, my property manager received phishing emails. Act as though you are a tenant. Find out who owns the structure. Careless. In a desperate situation, he even pretended to be a lawyer representing another property when he called the title office. The cashier immediately reported it to us after noticing it, and he turned within when those paths didn't work. Amanda. One of the neighbors called the management office to ask someone to check on the Harmons. I'm not sure what exactly happened. She claimed to have heard glass shattering. Voices were raised. The sort of rage that isn't limited to bills. It is a result of fear. Up there went the maintenance man. Nobody responded. However, he could hear Chad pacing and mumbling through the door. Amanda sobs. The yelling was overshadowed by the subsequent silence. I got an odd envelope a few days later. No external name, no address for return. Within, a message. I am aware of your actions. You believe you're smart, but I'm not afraid of you. I'll discover your identity. You'll regret it when I do. No signature. However, the handwriting was familiar to me. Chad wrote, just like he talked, furious, uneven, applying excessive pressure to the paper. My heart pounded as I sat there holding the letter, not because I'm afraid, not in my memories, because it reminded me of the time he stood in that kitchen and stared at me as if I were dirt underfoot. Amanda's posture next to him, not merely quiet, but in collusion. And now, the one grabbing at shadows was him, choking on doubt, yelling into nothingness. It had a poetic quality. It was risky, though, so I stepped up. Building security was contacted by my attorney. We increased the surveillance. Be discreet, lawful, typical. I ensured the safety of the other renters. One man's inability to bear the weight of his own brutality was not going to cause the building to collapse. What about Amanda? She didn't give another call. However, the building management informed me that she had been walking to work. She had sold her automobile. They were losing their utilities. By PM, lights are turned off. Some evenings there is no heat. Their relationship was not the only thing that had flaws. They were in the process of living. Nevertheless, I maintained my distance throughout, because retaliation wasn't the point. It has to do with resolution, allowing Chad's universe to contract until he became aware of his own smallness and letting Amanda make the choice. Is she going to remain in the cage or look for the key I put in front of her? She wasn't yet ready, and I knew it. However, the walls were getting closer. Furthermore, secrets tend to seep through gaps. That night, I was surprised when someone knocked on my door. Days had passed in silence. No management emails. Amanda did not leave voicemails. No more threats made in secret. Nothing but quiet. The kind that seems to be waiting like a storm huddled in the distance. But something in my chest constricted when the quiet, gentle knock came. I pulled the door open, wet from the rain. Amanda stood there. She clutched a grocery bag to her chest as if it were the only thing supporting her. Her lips was gaping and her eyes were crimson. However, nothing was revealed. She seems to have ran out of things to say days ago. I moved out of the way. Water streaming on the hardwood floor, she entered gently. We moved silently after I gave her a towel. I filled 2 mugs with chamomile tea after warming the kettle. As if she didn't want to remain long, she sat on the edge of the couch, as if she wasn't worthy. Perhaps she didn't. Her eyes were hollow as she gazed into her cup. At last, she remarked, "He's not who I thought he was." I said nothing. I knew after all. A part of me knew all along. But it was stress, I told myself, that all he required was assistance. Perhaps he would change his mind if I was patient. I remained silent, though. Her voice trembled as she looked up. "He believes we are being targeted. He has an obsession. He has been looking through my emails and phone. He accompanied me to work last week, claimed to be checking to make sure I wasn't participating." She felt a cold chill. Not from the cold, either. "Is there something I'm hiding?" he inquired. "If you had something to conceal." I gasped at it. She didn't hold out for a response. I informed him that it had been weeks since we had spoken, that I was completely unaware of your location. She hesitated. However, that was untrue. For the first time, I looked into her eyes. I came across a security notice mentioning your building. Same management firm. I worked it out. It wasn't difficult. Naturally, it wasn't. Amanda was intelligent. It has always been. However, brave does not always equate to clever. She suddenly had the appearance of someone who had at last opened her eyes and detested what she observed. I remained silent. "Not quite yet. I'm missing you," she muttered. "However, I no longer even know how to interact with you." My hand gripped the mug tightly. Her voice cracked as she said, "You left. I also gave you permission. I allowed him to push you away. I finally said something. No, Amanda. You prevented him. You joined him in standing." She was completely stopped by that. She blinked. She opened her mouth slightly as if to refute it, to protect herself. However, little remained to defend. I got to my feet, approached the window, gazed into the darkness. That night, I pleaded for your voice. Only one word, only one, and you said nothing. I heard her exhale behind me, a soft, fragmented sound. She said, "I didn't think it would get this bad. I believed I could control him." I whispered, "You can't handle a man like that. You outlive him, or you walk away from him." She didn't answer. She was not required to. For a long period, we sat in silence. Despite sharing blood, the two ladies lacked trust. Not quite yet, perhaps never. When she eventually got up to go, she carefully put the mug down. Unshed tears ringed her eyes. She said, "I don't expect forgiveness. All I had to do was recall what it was like to feel secure." I escorted her to the exit. She hesitated. Then she abruptly turned around and embraced me. At first, I didn't give the hug back. Then I did, but softly, with caution, like a person attempting to grasp a memory without allowing it to escape. She didn't say goodbye as she withdrew. She gave me one final glance and departed, and I sensed a change in my chest as the door shut behind her. Not pardoning, not quite yet, but the tiniest hint of anything that could develop into it eventually, if she permitted it. The invitation was sent out early on a Tuesday, silently, in a professional manner, without much fanfare, a gathering of tenants to talk about impending building upgrades. Scheduled for next week in the common room. Attendance is required. We welcome your questions. Chad would be there. I knew he couldn't help himself. He desired a name, a face, someone with whom to blame. He was unaware that he would be stepping directly into the clutches of the woman he threw away like a malfunctioning gadget. I got there early on the day of the meeting. I was dressed in black slacks and a charcoal gray blazer. Easy, classy, unidentifiable. My hair brushed my shoulders, now in gentle waves. The woman who once pleaded for a scrap of dignity at Amanda's kitchen table didn't look like me at all. Slowly, the common room filled up. Tenants began to arrive. Some people are interested, others were irritated, most unconcerned. Then Chad arrived. With the swagger of a man who expects conflict, he barged in. Amanda was like a shadow following him. He looked nowhere, didn't see me. He walked directly to the property manager, who was the only person he saw at the entrance. "Where is she?" He made a demand. "I would like to talk to the supervisor." "Today." The manager didn't panic. "The talk will cover all of the questions." Chad laughed. Amanda's eyes shifted to her shoes. I sat quietly in the back. The presentation started. Regular declarations, improvements, timelines. The recently installed security system, the landscape has been updated, the better insulation, realistic adjustments, wise choices. All of this was partially financed by the exact rent that Chad had so vehemently objected to. The manager then hesitated. "We appreciate ML Holdings' dedication to restoring the property and putting the comfort of the tenants first. Today, the owner is present. Does anyone have any inquiries? I got to my feet. The room swung about. I moved gently in the direction of the front. Be calm, steady. A soft drum thumped in my chest with each step. Chad's expression shifted from bewilderment to incredulity. Amanda's jaw sprang open in surprise. I looked around the room. "Good evening," I said. "Margaret is my name. The building is owned by me." A pin could be heard dropping. Chad got to his feet so quickly that his chair scuffed the floor. "You? It's a joke. This is what kind of game?" I gave him a look. Observe him closely and noticed the flaws he had attempted to conceal, the perspiration below his collar, the swelling beneath his eyes, the fear. "No game," I muttered, "just business." He stepped forward. "This was twisted by you. This has always been behind you. Our rent was increased by you. You're attempting to destroy us. I didn't back down. I provided you with a roof. I became better. I gave each tenant the same treatment. I didn't forget, though." He parted his lips to say something. However, I looked back at the group. "After the meeting, I'd be pleased to answer any questions anyone may have regarding the enhancements or modifications." "Thank you." I moved out of the way. The tension persisted even after the meeting resumed. Chad refused to take a seat. He remained still, shaking, enraged. Amanda's hands were clenched in her lap as she sat, wet and wide-eyed. Tenants approached me after the meeting, shook hands, asked questions, and expressed gratitude. Some had a suspicion, most didn't know. Chad waited for the room to be empty. Then he strode over to me. He screamed, "You think you've won? However, this isn't anything. You've created an adversary." I gazed at him, eye level. "No, Chad, nothing was made by me. You did. The day you treated me as though I didn't exist and looked me in the eye." Amanda put herself in our way. "Chad, give up." Startled, he turned to face her. "What did you just—" She repeated louder. "I said stop. She is not against you. She was never." "Are you?" He gazed at her as if she had hit him. She had, in a sense. Amanda's voice wavered as she turned to face me. "I had no idea. I promise. Regarding the structure, the cash, any of it." I gave a nod. "I am aware. How come you didn't tell me, since you had to witness it, not merely listen to it?" With tears, she blinked back. Chad backed off with a sneer. "You two are worthy of one another." "No," I answered softly. "She is worthy of better." I turned and left after that, and something changed inside of me for the first time since that terrible night in their kitchen. Not retaliation, not contentment. However, power, firm, quiet, and all mine. 4 days later, Amanda knocked on my door once more, carrying something that instantly made my knees give way. A book. The spine is barely holding, the leather is faded, and the corner is torn. The diary of my mother. Without saying anything, I opened the door. Her breath weak, her eyes wild, she stepped in. She answered, "I found it in my closet. You must have left it behind when I was last there." As if it were holy, she set it on the coffee table. And it was for me. I read it. My heart stopped beating. She hurried, and I wasn't trying to pry. However, her penmanship was familiar to me. I simply wanted to find something that made sense. There was a wall of silence between us, heavy, still. "I was unaware of Harold Sterling," she said, "or the cash, or the confidence, or any of it." I gently nodded once. I was also in the dark, not until I had lost everything else. Her voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me, Mom? Why did you give me the impression that you were powerless?" I gave her a direct look, and she didn't turn away for once. "Since I was powerless, I had no plan the night you shut the door on me. I had no money at all. There wasn't even a spot where I could cry without someone yelling at me to stop." Amanda flinched. "When I was at my lowest, I discovered the diary. As I was counting my supper money, After a week of not speaking to anyone, that journal, it told me more than simply who I was. I was reminded that I was important, that I wasn't the only person my mother loved. She stood up for me in silence, never being able to demonstrate it. Amanda took a seat. She tightened her hands in her lap. I'm not sure how I developed the ability to do what I did as a daughter. That's what I keep asking myself, again and again. I made my way to the window, gazed down at the street. Life goes along in a gentle hum. I answered, "You didn't become her all at once. The decisions were minor, ignoring the situation, putting peace before truth, thinking that loyalty equated to love." Despite the pain, she got up and came over to me. "I'm no longer with him." The words were like a bomb hitting the air. He made another attempt to search through my belongings, my luggage, my laptop. "No," I told him. That was it. With a shout, he packed his luggage and walked away, promised to return. The following day, I changed the locks. Stunned, I turned to her. "Without him, I don't know who I am," she said, voice quivering. "But rather than keep vanishing, I'd rather find out." We were silent, thick with all we hadn't mentioned. Then she glanced to the diary underneath. "I did something that you didn't deserve, what we carried out. I am unable to change that, but I'd want to give it a shot." I gently made my way back to her, sat down next to her. I remarked, "I used to dream about hearing those words. However, saying them now doesn't change the past. They revise it." She gave me a perplexed expression. I softly held her hand. "Now you see me. That makes all the difference." For a while, we sat there together, the kind of quiet that is healing rather than hurting, the kind that follows when truth has had its moment. Amanda stopped at the door before she went that evening. She answered, "You didn't raise me to be weak. I simply forgot your strength." I gave a quiet smile. "No," I replied. "You remembered. You simply quit searching." She was seeing everything now. I had always been who I was, not simply who I had become. I nearly didn't open the email that Chad sent me. My stomach turned just reading the topic line. "We must speak. Right now." I read it, slowly, with caution. His remarks were incisive, crazy, brimming with despair. "I am fully informed regarding the structure, out regarding the inheritance, about Sterling and your little secret. You believe you're smart? Do you really believe that you can destroy my life and still smile? Let me clarify. I'll go to the press if you don't reverse this. Your name, the affair of your mother, everything. Let's see how well your priceless reputation holds up now that everyone is aware of your true family background." In startled stillness, I gazed at the television. At last, he had made the connection. He had learned the truth somehow, either from Amanda or from his own research. I wasn't scared, though. Since the day I purchased the building, I had prepared for this moment. I sent the email to my lawyer. Chad was given a cease and desist letter by the next morning. It contained the manipulated emails we had surreptitiously linked to his IP address, the forged paperwork he attempted to file under a fictitious law company, and all of the threatening messages he had written to the property office. Logs of maintenance sabotage, complaints from tenants, and even audio recordings of his outbursts from the building's common areas were all present. It was not necessary for us to file criminal accusations. It was sufficient to file one slander and harassment lawsuit. He went into a panic. 2 days later, I received a call from Amanda, so I knew. "He's gone," she whispered, trembling. While I was at work, I packed, wrote that he was being pursued, claimed that you destroyed his life. I answered softly. "He damaged his own." Amanda said nothing. "Then I apologize. Once more, I will always believe that he deserves my silence." "You were afraid," I said. "I've been there. You become little because of fear. You don't have to remain that way, though." Chad quickly made an attempt at retaliation, publishing ambiguous tirades on social media, implying corruption, betrayal. He never gave names. He was unable to pay for it, not until my lawyer threatened legal action for every word he published in his second letter. Then he fell silent, at least in public. I knew in private that he would never forget the day he discovered the woman he had ejected with 2 luggage and a weary expression. The roof over his head was now his, the lease in his name. He once smashed the keys to all the closed doors in my door. That being said, Amanda was changing. Within a month, she left the apartment, discovered a tiny studio close to her workplace, began treatment, enrolled in a class on community art. She even painted me a picture, an abstract featuring a phoenix in shades of gold and dark red. Above my hearth, I hung it. We now spoke more frequently, not every day, but it was real when we did, sincere. No more acting like you're someone you're not. The final puzzle piece arrived in an envelope. One more letter from Mr. Goldstein. This one. Margaret, congratulations. Officially, the building has been moved. New contracts have been signed by the last tenants. Mr. Harmon's lawsuit has been settled in your favor. You can now sell, hold, or reorganize as you like. I gently folded the letter, pressed it on my chest. Money wasn't the only factor here, or real estate, or retaliation. Truth was at issue here, about getting my name back, my tale, my power. I gave a realtor a call the following morning. I was prepared to end the last chapter and let the door open to a life I didn't have to live anymore. At last, I could live it, according to my terms. In late spring, I sold the building. It was a clear, sunny Tuesday when the last documents were signed. Not much fanfare, not a ceremony, only the soft click of a pen, a hard handshake. And at last, the burden of 3 years of silence, betrayal, and anguish is being lifted. The following day, the funds were transferred to my account. I didn't celebrate, though. I wrote a check instead, a big one. A local refuge for women and children in need received half of the sales. I wish I had known that kind of facility existed when I was standing on that sidewalk that night with 2 luggage and no one to contact. I requested that a wing be constructed in my mother's honor, Eleanor's home. It was my way of paying tribute to the woman who silently gave me strength. He concealed a lifetime of secrets in order for me to learn the truth and surpass the expectations of the world. The other half? I purchased a modest home with it. It was not ostentatious. It's just a cute little 2-bedroom house in Cedar Park, on the same street where I grew up. There are oak trees in front, a swing for the porch, enough room to recuperate, to grow tomatoes if I ever felt like it, and to be peaceful. Amanda assisted with box carrying on the day I moved in. She remained silent. I didn't either. However, she sat next to me on the porch swing once we had finished unpacking, snuggled beneath her legs. She looked around the street as if she was trying to identify the girl she had been. She whispered, "I remember riding my bike here." I nodded before things became complicated. I informed her that you were always safe here. She said, "I forgot how that felt." We didn't discuss Chad. We didn't have to. His chapter had ended without any fanfare. Nothing but quiet. He vanished into another city, a new position, most likely a fresh lie. But first, he discreetly dropped his threats and signed a non-disclosure agreement. Another court battle was the last thing he wanted, or worse, for the truth about him to be revealed to everyone. Now he was a ghost. For dinner, Amanda stayed. We prepared tomato soup and toasted cheese sandwiches just like we did when she was younger. When she scorched one side, she giggled. When she attempted to place the blame on the pan, I laughed. For the first time in years, we actually laughed together. After she departed that evening, I watched the moonlight spread across the front yard while I stood at the window with a cup of tea in either hand, and I uttered the words out for the first time in a very long time. I pardon you, not to Amanda, to me, since it was the most difficult portion, failing to rise from the ashes. but discovering that I was never the flame they attempted to put out. They misjudged the spark that was me. Silence, they taught me, was weakness. However, I discovered how to use it as a weapon. They attempted to remove me, and I turned into someone people would always remember. I took a seat on the couch, took out the diary for the final time, and placed a note inside for Amanda to discover later. To be worthy, you don't need their adoration. To be strong, you don't need their approval. All you need is the truth, and to always remember who you are. There was a faint ticking of the clock in the background. In my palms, my tea became chilly. However, my heart, at last, it was warm. I didn't have to yell. I didn't have to prevail. All I needed to do was be myself. And now I was home at last. That's it for today's story. If you found it moving, don't forget to share the video with your friends and family. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below. Be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a great day.